Okay, if you haven't already, come to a comfy position. Just arriving in our meditation. And if you feel like you have already arrived, then see if there is anything else you can do to adjust your position and make yourself even 10% more comfortable. Settling into the body. Maybe taking the most delicious breath of the whole day. Maybe relaxing the brain, just like you would relax any other muscle of the body. Maybe feeling that brain sit just a little bit heavier between the ears. The shoulders sitting a little heavier. Shoulder blades sliding a little bit down the back. Arms and hands, each of the fingers heavy and relaxed. Internal organs sitting heavier in the pelvic bowl. Your seat settling into the ground or chair beneath you. legs heavy, feet heavy, every single one of the toes heavy and relaxed. And with every out breath, as the breath leaves the body, mind becomes more and more relaxed, more and more still. And whatever stillness you have found already, can you settle even just a little more, relaxing into the bliss of letting go, the bliss of emptiness, Can you experience, even for just one moment, what it's like to be nobody, nothing at all? To be as empty and anonymous as the ether of deep outer space. Coming back to our breath for a few moments. Re-entering our bodies after that little trip to outer space. Embracing the flow of our breath again, in and out. Finding something to enjoy about the sound of our breath. Maybe it will be the last thing you hear before becoming fully enlightened. Fall in love a little bit more with that breath. And over the course of your next 3 or 4 breaths, just let the mind bubble back to the surface, coming back to the room. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. All right, time for the talk. I was sitting around with a group of really beautiful, dedicated practitioners one time, and I love the conversation that happens in groups like these. It can be very fun. And on this particular day that I'm remembering, the conversation was, what do you think will be the last worldly attachment that falls away? What do you think will be the hardest thing in all of the material world to be let go of? You might remember this conversation. But some people gave various answers. I remember one person said, like, bodily health and well being. And when we went around in that circle around the picnic table, and it was time for me and my partner Kyle to give our answers, we just pointed at each other. Like, for me, it's going to be Kyle, and for Kyle, it's going to be me. And that was a few years ago. And if I think since then, I think that we have both put down our attachments toward each other. So bold words to say because we love each other so much. And those things can both be true at the same time. We can love each other so much and also not have Buddhist attachments towards each other. And I say Buddhist attachments because the word attachments can have many different meanings in our world. And in Buddhist language, in Buddhist world, all attachments are something to be put down, and there's no such thing as a healthy, good attachment because Nibbana is always going to be better. Having no attachments is always going to be better. However, the word attachment, and I know the person who is listening to this live will know this already, but in the psychology world, attachments can be detrimental to our well-being when we are attached to someone, but they can also, in a certain way, if we practice well, they can also be secure attachments. And these can be really healthy, they can be really good for us, and they can help us have really intimate, strong relationships with the people that we're closest with. So, same word, two completely different meanings. And again, just to review, all attachments in Buddhist world, in Buddhist language, not great, okay? But in psychology, modern psychology world and language, attachments can be so secure that they are healthy. And I'm not a psychologist, I'm not really qualified to talk about this, but I am going to talk about how I think through finding a very secure attachment with Kyle that actually the most secure attachment is non-attachment. And I can fairly confidently say that I don't think I have a Buddhist attachment to Kyle anymore. I also don't think Kyle has a Buddhist attachment to me anymore. And I think it's because we are very securely attached, to use the word in psychology context. So I'm going to talk about what that journey was like for me in finding that super secure attachment with Kyle. So secure that it's non-attached. Attachment that is so secure that it's non-attached. There we go. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay. So I think a key part of finding such a secure attachment with someone is actually even before I ever met Kyle, when I was thinking about like my non-negotiable list of what a partner needs to have in order for me to be their life partner. An absolute non-negotiable was that we both had to actively work toward resolving conflict all the way, so that every time a conflict arose, we would both face it. And this is just the noble truths, right? Face that conflict or that suffering, figure out what caused it, figure out a really good resolution. And when I say a good resolution, something that brings both of us peace, something that feels like that conflict is all the way resolved for both of us. And that was a non-negotiable. And I would say that is not just a non-negotiable for someone who I would date and now we're married, but also really a non-negotiable for the people who I really let closest to me, even who are not life partners, people who are good friends, really close loved ones, people who are really interested in practice, basically, is what that non-negotiable was all about. So even before we ever met, that was the groundwork. That was a non-negotiable for both of us in who we would eventually partner with. So that was really step one. And gosh, is it hard to find people who genuinely want to work through conflict. But they do exist. They do exist. I think there are many of them in the world of Dhamma practice. So that's the first step. And then as we became very close, I think developing a lot of trust that we truly cared for each other's best interest. And that also includes if we decided not to end up with each other eventually, that we really wanted what was best, even if that meant we chose not to be together. And I'll get more into that later. But I think all the way from the very beginning, that was baked into our relationship. And just demonstrating time and time again to each other that we really genuinely care so deeply. And I was actually listening a while ago, listening to an interview that I think his name is Ajahn Asoko. Forgive me if I misremember that, but he is Ajahn Sumedho's attendant. And I was listening to how tenderly and closely he cares for Ajahn Sumedho, and how tenderly a lot of attendants care for senior monks. And I really thought, that is exactly how Kyle cares for me. Like, maybe he doesn't need to hold me as I walk from one room to the next, because at least for right now, I can do that for myself. But I think such a secure attachment was only possible to establish because we've built so much trust that we genuinely care so much about each other. And then as we built more and more trust, about 1 year into our relationship, we got to the point where we could really let our childhood trauma out to play. And right about at the 1 year mark of our relationship, we just had a few months of extremely intense practice. So a lot of conflict, a lot of childhood trauma being triggered. And what an amazing, at the time, it didn't feel fun, okay? It didn't feel like rich practice. It just felt awful. But looking back now, I can see how so much old lifelong trauma, maybe even many lifelong trauma, was let go of during that summer. And a lot of it was, I was really deeply conditioned in the way that I was brought up to hide my suffering. And whenever suffering and conflict arose in the family unit, the way that we were taught to deal with it was to isolate ourselves, or to isolate the person who had difficult feelings and just let them simmer on it until the heat dissipated. And the suffering was never really let go. It was just really swept under a rug. So that's how I learned how to deal with my conflict and suffering from my early childhood. And what a complete paradigm shift it was to learn during that summer that when suffering arose, I could talk about it with my partner and trust that my partner would care for me. And it sounds obvious now, It sounds so simple now, but gosh, did my brain break that summer? It was so painful, not just to teach myself how to face that suffering. And we were really just practicing the first three noble truths as a couple. You know, when suffering arose, instead of running away from it, we would face it together. But another part of why it was so painful and so hard was because, in order to break through and to see this new way of handling our suffering, I couldn't break through without first experiencing this tidal wave of grief. eh, Because at the time I was 28. So I felt this huge wave, and the word wave is really not big enough to capture how big it felt, but this just earth shaking wave of grief for not knowing a better way to deal with suffering for the first 28 years of my life. And I really think that if I did not have the time, energy, resources to allow that grief to arise, because it does take a lot of physical energy as well. It wiped me out physically, not just mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. If I didn't have the capacity to allow that grief to arise in me, then that grief would have just stayed buried inside of me. And if that could not arise and then cease, then the new way of seeing suffering and conflict, I think, could not have broken through in my understanding. We were both teachers at the time, so we had that summer off and we could just focus on this deep, deep work. So I had a lot of time, energy, like my body was resourced well. So I think that's a really big reason why that grief and that work could happen. But yes, this new way of understanding and working with suffering, not as something to hide, not as something to run away from, but something that I could just face, and not even alone, but trust my partner to help me face and face with me. That was a complete game changer. And I've mentioned many, many, many times before about all the occasions where Kyle would gently bring to my attention that something needed to be investigated in me, whether that was during an argument, and Kyle always had a very diplomatic way of asking me to please investigate something because some habit of mine, some conditioning was really hurting Kyle. And because it was hurting them, could I please investigate it? And of course, of course I would. And there was a time when I was displaying some signs of early childhood trauma. I had this compulsion of picking at my skin and scratching. And Kyle also pleaded with me in this really vulnerable, sweet way to please investigate that and please to seek the help I needed and to find a therapist who could help me through that. And through that, that's how I discovered somatic experiencing. And through somatic experiencing, let go of not only that compulsion, but so much other pain that was deep in my bones from the first 2, 3 years of my life. And again, that was not just spiritual work, not just emotional and mental work, but also deeply physical work. Because I think I was only able to go that deep into that trauma release because I had a lot of bandwidth at the time. Work was very slow and easy at the time. And I remember how physical it felt. Like I've never been in labor, but maybe it was like what 1% of what labor is to birth a human baby. I mean, I've heard and seen that it's very painful, but maybe it is a whisper of that. like how I would break into a sweat when I was letting go of that trauma, how deeply physical it felt, how I could feel my muscles tensing and aching as I was letting go of that deep suffering, and how afterwards I felt totally spent. So, if I had a to-do list of 100 things, I don't think my body would have let me do that. I don't think my mind would have let me do that. But I did, and it was scary. And I'm so grateful for the extra support and courage that my partner gives me. I mean, I read all these biographies of arhants, and it seems like they just muscle through it themselves, or I know a lot of them have the encouragement of their arahant teachers or their master teachers. And, that's one reason why I list Kyle as my foremost teacher in this lifetime, because Kyle is the one who so greatly encourages me in practice and in many other things. And then we went to Thailand. And boy, did the monks in Thailand just blow my life up. Okay, there's like two landmarks in my life where before and after those landmarks are just totally different. So one is meeting Kyle, and life before Kyle and life after Kyle was totally different. And the other one was going on pilgrimage. And before pilgrimage, every single day, I would pray, 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 pray. Please, may I have a baby? Please, may I have a book deal? And shortly after pilgrimage, I didn't want either of those things anymore. And maybe to a distant acquaintance, they would think that not much about me had changed. But to the people closest to me, and especially to Kyle, who is the closest to me, Kyle's feedback is that I had completely changed in my values, in my interests, in my needs, in my personality. Just everything about me had changed. And it was so drastic and so dramatic and maybe even so violent of a change that for a while, everybody around me, including me and including Kyle, thought that I would give up the worldly life and ordain as a monastic. And it was very scary. But I'll always remember the day when Kyle really looked me in my eyes and said in such a tender way that if that's what I really wanted, then that would be okay with them. And having that freedom to really explore how much I wanted that allowed me to go into a meditation where I asked myself the question, what would be best for my practice? And to go into that innermost corner of my heart where when I take questions, no matter how complicated they might be, how difficult they might be, how much I may not want the answers, whatever the circumstances, there's this corner of my heart where if I take difficult questions there, I only need to ask them one more time. And it is that degree of naked, raw honesty that exists there. So, in that meditation, I asked myself, what would be best for my practice? Should I ordain or should I stay with Kyle? And the very, very quiet voice in my heart said to stay with Kyle. I can hear them rummaging around the kitchen right now. It's very nice. But experiencing that degree of love, unconditional love, really showed me that Kyle loves me for the person that I am, and not because, not out of convenience, not out of habit, not out of history, but really just loves me. And I think that was really key to developing such a secure attachment that we can be non-attached. And and also at the same time, being able to imagine a world where, one day Kyle and I will part. Whether it's by their choice or by one of our deaths, we are going to separate ways at some point. And actually, in a really secure relationship, I have learned all the people in the relationship know that they can be happy even if they're not in the relationship. And they're completely confident in the fact that no matter what, they can find a way to be happy, whether it's with a certain person or not. And I think by imagining an alternate life, I guess, where whether it's at one hermitage or at a monastery or whatever, imagining being really able to clearly imagine a life where I could be happy, even if I'm not with Kyle, I think that was very key also to finding a relationship and attachment that was so secure that it's not attached. Because I think I would be happy, if in some alternate reality I moved in with the Ayas, if they would have me, I think I would be happy, and I think it would just be a different flavor of love. And I've heard this before from people whose spouses die when they're a little younger, and they, after a period of grief and mourning, they find someone else and fall in love and have another great love. That one love is not greater or less than the other, it's just a different flavor. And gosh, I love the flavor of being with Kyle. We make each other laugh so much. It is so warm and colorful and sweet. And 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 there are other flavors. It's 31 Baskin Robbins flavors over here. Well, maybe not 31, but I can imagine also other ways that I could be totally happy. And I think having that security within myself, that no matter what happens in life, I can find a way to be happy, allowed for this really weird, like 2 week spell. And I've talked about this before, a 2 week spell where we would just be relaxing on the couch watching TV, and this immense grief would arise in me that Kyle would die one day. And it felt as real as if I were at Kyle's funeral. Like I would just all of a sudden be weeping as we were watching some silly TV show. And I would just be sobbing that my Kyle would die one day. And it just kept surfacing, I think, for a couple weeks. And every single time it felt as real as if I were at Kyle's deathbed or at Kyle's funeral. Until one night when I felt like that grief was a bubble that popped. And I knew that, yes, that grief would happen when we do part ways one day. And it would be okay. Like, not just intellectually knowing that, but in my body, knowing that even that grief is also just another feeling, just another sankhara, and that there's something so much bigger than that, that I was connecting with more and more and more. And ever since then, I would say that my attachment with Kyle has been so secure that maybe it's not attached at all. And I think if somebody were to ask Kyle, are you so secure that you're not attached at all? I think Kyle would hem and haw about it, because Kyle doesn't really speak in absolutes like that. And that is their personality, which I love so much, and really balances my more extreme personality. And the story of how Kyle has set down their attachments is their story to tell. But I can talk a little bit about my experience of supporting Kyle as they also put down that attachment more and more to me. So I think a lot of it has just been understanding what Kyle's needs are so that I can support and meet those needs and make sure that their heart is cared for. so that they can have a very secure attachment with me. Um, so of course, like learning not to run away, but to share our feelings, learning that I can't disappear for hours at a time and it's better to let Kyle know what's going on with me. And even, like I have this personality and this conditioning where, like, for example, when we toured one of the apartments that we rented, the last apartment that we lived in, I knew within like 10 seconds of stepping into that building that it was going to be the next place that we lived. And I just had this really strong intuition. And Kyle has more of a personality where they like to fully consider things. They like to let the decision arise a little more slowly and contemplate it and kind of like see this side and see that side and then just let it sit for a while. And if it still feels good, and then they will say, yes, this is our apartment. So a lot of my learning has been respecting Kyle's right to make a decision too, so that we can make a decision together as partners. And even if I turn out to be right in the end and we do live in that apartment and it's a really great place to live for a few years, respecting Kyle's process and respecting that Kyle has a right to enter into big decisions together as a couple and not to be dragged into it. So a lot of that has been just withholding my opinion, as simple as that. And just letting them find for themselves because it's so much more meaningful when we make decisions together in partnership. That was very valuable learning for me. Hmm. And then I think another big milestone was that, Kyle takes such good care of me and my feelings, as tenderly and as closely as Aja Nisoko cares for Lumpur Sumedo, right? So a lot of that has been learning for me to take care of my own feelings more, and to also like foster the space for Kyle to also express their feelings more, and for me to take care of Kyle. So it's not like this attendant senior monk dynamic, but really like we can both be attendants to each other equally because we're both human beings. Oh no matter how free we ever become, we're always going to have off days. We're always going to have tired days. So learning how to be each other's attendants. So what that means is really for me to learn how to become more of Kyle's attendant. And a lot of that has been accepting and making room for Kyle to be irritated, not just at work or not just at some other thing, but also irritated at me, and just being so patient and accepting of that. Grumpy at all the world, including me, stressed at all the world, including me. And one really helpful tool for that has been seeing like the wounded small child that arises in Kyle sometimes. And I've been talking recently about caring for our conventional minds, but also seeing Kyle's conventional mind irritated and stressed and grumpy, and caring for Kyle's conventional mind when it has more needs, with as much wisdom and compassion and loving kindness as if I were caring for my own mind. And holding Kyle's irritation as the meditation object, seeing if there's a skillful way to deal with it. And if there is, of course, caring for it in whatever way I can. And if there's nothing for me to do, then just holding Kyle's irritation as if I would hold my own. So without judging and without rushing toward it to fix it and not rushing away from it to hide from it, but just being with it. It's been very healthy learning for me. And you know what? It has been really wonderful to learn that I am more annoying than I thought I was. I love learning this. I love it so much. And I feel so lucky because I think when a lot of people become very confident in their practice and more established in their practice, maybe they don't have someone who will tell them that they're being annoying or tell them that they're being weird in a really loving and level way. And even if the truth is not flattering, I will always, always choose to see the truth. And if the truth is that I am more annoying than I thought I was, and that is the truth, then I am so glad to see it. I think no matter how free we become, what I think when the Buddha describes arahants as having diamond minds, that is because they're so connected with their pure consciousness, and it is the pure consciousness side of their mind that is the diamond. And I think we all will have to deal with our conventional selves, no matter how free we get. And the conventional self will always be more of a plate of melting jello. And I love seeing that plate of melting jello clearly. And I think part of our my practice too with supporting Kyle is also reminding them that they can also be happy without me. Whether we part by choice or by death one day, that anybody that they choose to want to be with would be so, so lucky to be with them. And that makes me think of when we were on pilgrimage, there were a couple arahants who said very nice things to me. And somebody said, like, oh, wow, Kyle must feel so lucky to be with you because you received this praise. Um, but I think it's actually the opposite. It's completely the opposite in that if there is anything about me or my practice that is praiseworthy, it is because of all the ways I have learned and grown in practice through my love with Kyle. And all the ways that they've inspired me, all the ways that our love has inspired me and made me feel so safe so that I can dive courageously into practice. So maybe may we all love each other in this way, unconditionally, loving each other without attachment, inspiring each other through our community to practice deeper and deeper every day, all the time. Because it's the highest happiness that we're all shooting for here. I believe in us. We can do it. All right. May we practice well. And if you have any questions, comments, anything, I would love to hear.
It's a really sweet talk, Grace. Thank you. Um, and I was a little meditating in and out of it, so that my precision may be low. Um, but there was something you're talking about with sort of noticing that you could be really happy in multiple circumstances or situations. And there's something I've been playing with is like really letting myself fully go there, go to one circumstance completely and like and like really letting go of the other. And it's just still in my imagination because it's not happening, but it's all in the imagination anyway. It's all in the mind anyway. Um, but I had an experience of that, of sort of doing that, and then because of the circumstances I'm in right now, I had to completely forget about everything else because I had to focus on something for work. And it was really fascinating because I just noticed that all of this angst that I had about the future and what circumstances would make me happy or not, like it just went poof. It just like totally, it's temporary, I'm sure, but it like just totally went away. And that gave like a glimpse into some kind of possibility, but I don't know what to do with it yet. So I would love your reflection on like how to work with that when our minds are like projecting out into the future and thinking of these circumstances and the possibility of putting it down, the possibility of how to play with it, and then how to keep working with that.
Mm. So is your question about how to discern like that innermost part of the heart that I was talking about, even with all the monkey mind business?
That isn't the question I asked, but it may be the question that I need to ask more, have been thinking about more, like how to find that deepest point of clinging.
Mm. Well, I think you're saying it's like all in the mind, which, in a certain way, everything is all in the mind. But there's like two different ways of accessing the part of our mind when we do ask those questions of ourselves. So there's the imagination, and then there's the intuition. And I think a lot of times people go into the imagination, and then that's where like more concrete thinking happens, like more pros and cons lists.
Yeah.
And to me, the way I know that I'm in the imagination is like all my energy goes to the front of my head.
Mm,
It's all right here. Versus when I tap into the intuitive part, like all my energy pulls back into the base of my skull.
mm,
Yeah. And it, I think, requires a lot of courage
mm,
because that part of the mind is only accessible with difficult questions when we're willing to hear the answer no matter what it is.
mm,
And I think that courage requires dedication to the truth above anything else.
mm. Can I ask a follow-up?
Of course.
So what I've been noticing is like in attempting to access that, what you're calling the intuitive, when there's like this blockade of, yeah, some fear. It's really like usually fear is what I find, like some fear about finding the truth, even if I can't say what that fear exactly is or why I couldn't pinpoint it. It feels really slippery. It feels like hard to continue to access.
Mm. And what is your question?
It's a how, but it's not, I don't know if that's something that you can answer. Like how to continue to drop into that
Mm.
despite the layers of fear that maybe this stuff is so intangible. I'm not sure I'm making sense.
Mm. Well, I can say that when I was asking that question of myself about whether or not I should ordain, I felt that if the answer came that the best thing for my practice was to ordain, then I would be willing to leave Kyle. And I would be willing to quit my job, like everything. If my parents didn't give me consent, I would lie on the floor and pee my pants until they said yes. No, I would do anything.
This is like a really sincere commitment.
Yeah,
That that commitment goes beyond fear, it sounds like.
yeah. And it was a commitment to the truth the commitment to practice, not to anybody, not to anything, just to the truth.
Mm, that's very beautiful. Thank you for sharing.
And I will say, like, I have it wasn't my first time going to that little corner of my heart, like I felt like I had practice. Like, am I straight or am I queer? I'm queer. But even like on a day-to-day level, like what does practice call me to do? Take a nap, you know?
Hmm.
Just it's a muscle. Keep building it.
Hmm. Yeah.